We could get really mired in the legal issues here, the political issues, but let's talk about the business issues. Why should business care about this case?
Well, ultimately, business is about talent, and we want to make sure we're a magnet for the best and brightest from all over the world. So we really attract people here. The discussion right now about immigration is who do we keep out, and that's a legitimate discussion to have. But we also have to have a discussion about how do we bring people here. It's now we're seeing innovation entrepreneurship globalize, and we're going to remain the most innovative entrepreneurial nation. We need to win what's now a global battle for talent. So some of the provisions like a startup visa or the international entrepreneur rule, they're going to be very important to make sure we build bipartisan support for those things, so people who do come here, get great educations, get a PhD or what have you, are able to stay here. One example I mentioned in my book, The Third Wave, is somebody graduated from Wharton, the same school that President Trump went to, started a company, wanted to stay here, couldn't because he couldn't extend his visa, got kicked out, had to go back home, which happened to be India, and that company, Snapdeal, now has 5,000 employees in India, and he wanted to be in the United States. So this issue of immigration is not just a problem to solve, it's also an opportunity to seize. It's not just about who do we keep out, it's also how do we bring people in that can create the jobs of the future all across the country.
So Steve, you're joined with some other very distinguished leaders of tech industry making that argument. At the same time, when we look at this case, this is 7 countries. Is this more about the next case than it is about this one? I mean, really, how many people are we bringing in from Libya to work in our tech industry?
Yeah, I think this issue around the executive order has less to do with the issue around high-skilled immigration, but it's the first battle around immigration. I think part of the, and I listened to some of, not all, but some of the debate last night with the judges. I thought they actually asked very tough questions on both sides. So it actually was a reminder that we have a great judicial system here, and although people might get frustrated about some of the things that happen in terms of the politics of things, it's great to see them asking tough questions. I don't know how they will rule, but I do think they asked some tough questions on both sides. I think part of what they were asking and pressing the Justice Department on was, what is the urgency now? And I think part of this is some of the statements that President Trump made, some of his advisors made during the campaign and even after the campaign were sort of alarmist, and they really were suggesting there was something. Now, we don't know exactly what information the president has. It is a tough issue because in general the president should have control over national security issues. They have intelligence that the rest of us don't have. But I think the perception I have, and I think what I was hearing from some of the justices, it wasn't clear that President Trump had information that really created the urgency that he was suggesting was there.
So, Steve, what we do know is no matter what the court rules, it's going to go to the Supreme Court most likely. So I want to take a broader step back and look at what tech does for the longer term. Do they wind up trying to hire internally and have to pay more for U.S. workers, or are they going to have to start moving business overseas to retain those workers that may have issues coming into the U.S.? With your experience, which is most likely, and what does that wind up doing to profits?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a false choice. I mean, the nature of your question suggested that somehow the high-skilled people coming from other countries are getting paid less, and that's one of the reasons that they're attracted. That may be true in some fields. In the tech field, that's not really the case. I mean, we really need to attract people from all over the country, and particularly around the engineering side of things. And many of the companies now, it's not just the tech industry. Almost every company is now a tech company. Walmart, for example, is a big user of technology. McDonald's is a big user of technology. So that's why these jobs are so important. But the other thing I think that needs to happen, and I think Silicon Valley has been a little bit tone deaf on this, is one of the reasons President Trump won is a lot of people in the middle of the country feel left behind. They aren't seeing the benefits of innovation, including the benefits of job creation, and there's a reason why that's the case. Last year, 85% of the venture capital went to the states that Clinton won. Only 15% went to the states Trump won. Over 30 states in aggregate only got 15% of venture capital. California alone got 50% of venture capital. So what's happening is the venture capitalists are funding the disruptive companies in places like Silicon Valley that are creating new technologies that often disrupt and destroy jobs in the middle of the country, but we're not offsetting that by backing the entrepreneurs in the middle of the country so they can create the companies and create the jobs in Pennsylvania and Ohio and in Michigan and these other states. That has to change, what we call the rise of the rest. We need more capital flowing to more entrepreneurs in more places and level the playing field so everybody everywhere has a shot at the American dream.
Steve, that's a really good trickle down that you established throughout the election, but what's a big tech company like an Apple supposed to do about something like that?
I think they can invest more in companies in the middle of the country, and they've talked about investing in funds, for example. They're doing that. They can look at, for some of their products, creating some of the factories to make those products within this country. One of the interesting byproducts of the automation of manufacturing, which net does destroy jobs, is it also allows you to do manufacturing in places that weren't possible 10 years ago. So some of the things that got outsourced 10 years ago are becoming insourced again because the factories are more automated. So the downside is there are fewer manufacturing jobs now than there were 10 years ago. The upside is some of the things that had to move offshore before for cost reasons. Some of the companies are reconsidering that, I believe, including Apple.
Steve, I want to try and put the talent story together with the investment story, investing in talent. You said yourself that this immigration story for the tech companies is the first battle of something else that might come down the line. And what I assume they're really worried about is what may or may not happen with H1B visas and those kind of things. There is an argument that those visas have been abused to get cheaper talent from abroad. You're a man that knows the tech industry well. Do you sympathise with that argument in any way, shape or form?
I'm sure there's some abuses of H1B, and taking a fresh look at it makes sense. But actually, H1B is not the focus of high-tech and high-skilled immigration. It really are these provisions like a startup visa. If you come to this country and you want to start a company, can we actually staple a green card to your diploma? People have talked about it on both sides, Republicans, Democrats, for 2 decades. It still hasn't happened. Often people come here for these educations and then are kicked out and are forced to go someplace else and start their companies there. There's something else put in place recently, the International Entrepreneur Rule. Something like that will allow us to attract and keep more people here. So H1B gets all the attention, but actually it's the bigger tech companies that do care more about that. At the core, I think we need to focus more on the startup side of things, the entrepreneur side of things, and things like the startup visa are way more important than things like H1B.
Just in terms of mass, which one moves the dial more for this administration to appease their base as far as you're concerned, Steve?
I think the startup visa it would be critical because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, the reason President Trump is President Trump is he appealed to people in the middle of the country who felt left behind. They're left behind by globalization, left behind by digitization, and we need to figure out ways to offset what's happened to them with new kinds of jobs. You can only do that by backing startups. Startups are the major job creators, these young, high-growth companies. The Kauffman Foundation did research. They said all the net jobs in the country come from these startups, not from the small businesses on Main Street, not from the big Fortune 500 companies, these young, high-growth startups. So if we're not backing those startups all across the country and helping this, the rest rise, if you will, we're not going to create jobs all across the country. And a lot of people are going to be left behind because of that. All the investment, all the focus is on the coast, not in the middle of the country. So that has to be a key focus of the Trump administration. It's not just around immigration. That's a piece of it. It's also what are the right investment incentives. Things like the Invest in Opportunity Act that was introduced recently in a bipartisan way would create sort of the equivalent of empowerment zones, create some investment incentives to invest in the middle of the country, back these entrepreneurs, and help create the jobs in those places. So I think we need an all-in focus on how do we remain the most innovative entrepreneurial country, how do we level the playing field so we have a more inclusive form of innovation entrepreneurship, and it doesn't matter so much where you are or who you are or what you look like. Everybody everywhere has a fair shot at the American dream.